legal authority is the use of any of the following during an investigation, provided that the rights were inherent of that particular agency or company. And when we talk about consent, search warrant, plain view, which is a subset of a search warrant, and subpoena, right? Just keeping in mind that, consent, anyone can, can consent to something, and they do have a right to revoke their consent, right? And this is especially in relation to law enforcement. And when it comes to a search warrant or even subpoena, a lot of both actually have to have a judge to allow the search warrant, right? It has to be signed by a judge, and subpoena also. Subpoena, you may have some agencies, for example, especially law enforcement agencies, have subpoena powers, right? So, like for example, in city government, it used to only be two agencies that had a subpoena power, and that was the city council and Department of Investigation, right? Those two agencies were the only two that had subpoena powers, and they still do have subpoena powers. But there are other agencies that may have subpoena powers, but limited to their jurisdiction, right? It's sort of like the difference between a police officer and a peace officer, right? So I don't know if you guys, know the difference or heard of this, but the whole point is that, someone that has police powers or full police powers, their jurisdiction is very broad, so it may encompass, like the entire, like New York State, for example, or it may entire only New York City, or it may include only a given agency, right? So when we talk about police powers, we're talking about full police powers that are all encompassing. And then when we talk about a peace officer, powers or peace officer status, that's normally referring to jurisdictional limits, where a peace officer is police, but only in a given jurisdiction, right? So, for example, sanitation police. Like if you guys ever seen New York City sanitation police, they are legitimate police officers, but they're really peace officers, meaning their police powers are based on their jurisdiction. In this case, it would be sanitation. Bridge and tunnels. Bridge and tunnels officers are actually peace officers. They're not police officers. Correction officers are peace officers. Firemen are peace officers. Um, TLC enforcement, right? They look like police, right? And they have uniforms and everything else, but they have no guns. They too are peace officers. And peace officers' jurisdiction on whether you carry a gun or not is also based on the powers that are written. That's especially written in the but like for New York State anyway. It's what's written in the criminal procedure law, a civil procedure law. See, it's a CPL. Give me a second. It's been a while since I've discussed it, so excuse me one second to make sure we still. Yeah, criminal procedure. I was right. So it's whatever's written in New York State criminal procedure law. That's what determines a whether a peace officer is allowed to carry a gun. And then even in that, there's jurisdictions, there's federal officers that are also peace officers too, right? Same thing, based on jurisdiction. I'll give you an example that I've had like a lot of friends who work for the Federal Reserve, right? And Federal Reserve, they're officers, they're full uniform, they carry weapons while on duty, but off duty, they cannot carry, right? So they only can carry while they're on duty, right? So even that, again, it's based on the jurisdiction and based what's written into New York State law and what's written into whatever the heads of the agencies, whether they are allowing their peace officers to carry a gun or not, if they're able to carry, are they able to carry 24/7 or not? So to parallel that with when it comes to subpoena, it kind of works the same exact way where it's based on jurisdiction, right? So let's say the DA's office, for example, may have, they actually not may, they do have subpoena powers also. Certain law enforcement agencies may have subpoena powers. So for Civilian Complaint Review Board, they have subpoena powers to be able to force a police officer to come in and testify on some sort of like, abuse case, right? Abuse of authority case or whatever, right? So in those instances, there are agencies that do have specialized subpoena powers, but again, it's based on jurisdiction and it's based on the authority, right? The legal authority that's been bestowed upon them based on some sort of, law that's written into, New York State Charter or even New York City Charter, right? Dependent. Uh, so anyway, we'll get into these the definitions of each of these. So consent is literally just having the language specific to either the seizure or future forensic examination of digital media. I've catered this towards digital evidence, but it doesn't always have to be digital evidence, right? It can be just straight up evidence, too, right? So it doesn't always have to be digital, so if I've written this specific to digital evidence, just keep in mind that it doesn't always have to be, the evidence doesn't have to be digital, in that respect, right? So consent is literally just, having a language saying, look, I'm gonna be able to, I want to look at this, this piece of equipment or comb through it, and I'm asking for your consent. And I do have a sample consent form to show you guys, on this as well. With a search warrant, it allows you to do search and seizures of the evidence as predefined under the warrant, right? So it has to be very explicit as to what's going to be seized and what can actually be searched, on that warrant. And the thing with a search warrant is normally what happens, you have a whole bunch of people that are reading this document, and when I say people, I'm talking about actual law enforcement, right? If law enforcement is going to execute a search warrant, they normally have to discuss with each of the people that are part of the search, the actual search warrant, SWAT or the group that's going out to execute a search warrant. They have to be aware of what exactly they're looking for, what they can take, and what they can search through, right? And all that is specified within the search warrant itself. And typically, what happens is everyone gets to see a copy of the search warrant. It used to be way back when, even like when I was doing these, every officer or every person who would go out on a search warrant would have their own copy. But what was happening, people were being careless, and they would lose, they would lose the search warrant itself. They would accidentally, leave it, at the site, and that posed a lot of issues and problems. And so what they did was they started saying, you know what, we're going to make one copy, and everyone has to pass that copy around, and you sign it as proof that you're ready. So if there are 20 people that are going out on a search warrant, and that was typical. Normally, I don't know if you've ever seen warrants actually getting executed. There's never one person or two people. You're going in with like 20, 30, 30 people. I would say, it's like 30, 30 deep, going with 30 people. Out of those 30 people, everyone's broken up into groups. You may have like the entry team. You got, and then from there, you got people that are, forensic accountants going through the files, attorneys. You have auditors, the computer people, right? The computer forensic people, as well as security, all the security detail, the folks that are going to secure, the scene from, and that can be different from the entry team, and then people that will always be doing security, before and after. So, and then broken up into groups. If someone gets hurt, there'll be all sorts of they're normally known as like tactical plans. There's like a tactical plan that gets created up front. And on that tactical plan, you have like all the people that are involved, all the groups, the precincts that are in the area. And every time a search warrant gets executed, you normally have to coordinate it with the resident precinct to make sure that the precinct is aware that you're executing a search warrant, because you don't want to like execute a search warrant and somebody calls the cops and says, there's criminals at the door, they're breaking in. and everybody's not in uniform, right? Not necessarily. Everyone's basically like in plain clothes, and we may have like raid jackets and ballistic vests underneath that. So it's not always that obvious, and in some instances it is, and in other instances it isn't. So we always try to coordinate with the resident precinct whenever search warrants are in fact executed. So that way, at the very least, if they do receive calls, they'll still send out, a car out there just to make sure, everything is good. But normally, the resident precinct will also send a few officers for the sake of help assisting with the security. So any questions on that?
I have a question, Professor.
Sure.
I know you said before when we were talking about being able to search a computer, someone gives you consent and then they revoke it. You have to stop, but you can keep whatever you find. Does that apply with warrants, or can they take the stuff that you've gathered while you have consent and they can take it back?
Yeah. So once it's a search warrant, you can whatever's deemed on the search warrant itself. Like if it's explicitly written that you can take that computer or you can take that whatever it is, that piece of evidence, then they can't, like you're allowed to take it. There's no consent on that. But let's say if you didn't have a search warrant and you went in and he's like, oh, I see you have this picture of something. Can I have that picture? You asking for their consent. Um, if you take it, I mean, if it's one of those things like if you take it and leave, it's fine. Meaning they can't really like retract that. But let's say if you're still in the presence and they're asking for the picture back or whatever, then you're supposed to be able to give it up.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Again, keep in mind that, right, what happens in practice is very different than what it is on paper, right? What happens in practice is normally like if an officer or some sort of legal, some person are using legal authority to say, and it's no longer legal authority at that point, right? It's more intimidation or whatever, right? If I go, oh, can I see that picture? And then I have access to the picture, like physically, and then I'm gonna keep it on my person, and then I'm gonna say, no, you already gave me the picture. I'm not giving it back to you. I can play that card too, right? But just keep in mind that when we do this, or when any law enforcement for that matter does this, that there's a possibility that whatever piece of evidence they have will not be admissible in court, right? And in some instances, it may not matter, right? Because the evidence may be gathered for the purposes of intel, right? For the purposes of gathering the intelligence and not necessarily to be admissible in court, right? So just keep that in mind that it's not always about, getting things, admissible in court in terms of evidence. Most of it is about gathering evidence to produce additional leads to get, more, fruits of crimes, happening.
Thank you.
Right, you got it. And Plainview is giving you the authority to be able to seize a computer, hardware, software, or digital media. And Plainview is actually a subset of a search warrant, right? Whatever is not explicitly written in a search warrant, you go to, you go to, let's say, someone's, home, and you see that they have, let's say a game system, right? And this game system actually has, you realize, what, this thing has, hard drive capacity. They can store all sorts of files on this. I think I may want to take this, but it wasn't explicitly written in the search warrant. Well, you can take it because it's in plain view, right? Same goes for like obvious things, right? If there's guns or drugs or whatever, same thing, same rules apply. Where this may not have been written in the search warrant, although it normally is, and most of the time, right? When as part of the tactical plan, you'll have, all the, like whatever records, if they're criminal records or licenses, if there are any gun permits that whoever's house you're going to, and you're going to execute a search warrant at, whether it's a business, place of business, or residence, we're going to have some sort of, all these documents that prove, what's the rap sheet of the people that are in the house, what are their, do they have any, like licenses, gun permits or whatever. So that way, if you see him, it's not immediately illegal, right? It's not outright illegal, But the possibility is, you want to make sure, that the, the officers that are executing a search warrant are protected, as well as the people that you're getting this information from, right? Not everyone that, everyone's home that you're investigating necessarily is part of, this crime, the actual, crimes that, they're being accused for, right? So same goes for businesses, right? Sometimes the people that are working in the business have no idea that what they're doing is actually illegal. It might be just a few, maybe a few of the folks. Maybe it might not even be the bosses that know, right? It could be maybe some of the managers, right? So, you always got to keep that in mind, when these search warrants are getting executed, and but also keep in mind that Plainview, is the real thing. And what normally happens is that when you do see something that you think you should have added to the search warrant, you seize it, and then you go back to to the judge, and then you explain, look, we didn't realize that they had this. Can you also add this because this is part of what we're looking for. And what the judge normally does in that case, it creates like an addendum to the search warrant and adds that evidence onto it. Now it can be thoroughly searched. And a subpoena, what a subpoena literally means is ordering a person or organization to testify or produce evidence within a given amount of time or face penalty. And a subpoena is just a very standardized document. It says, you must come here and bring yourself, and also evidence that we ask you. And the writer is if you want more specific information, right? So it's kind of like almost like a search warrant, but it's a more scaled down version, of a search warrant. So for example, like I've seen subpoenas, where this is where like a lot of law enforcement agencies will subpoena each other. So you get like the DA's office may subpoena another law enforcement agency and say, we're involved in a case, and we want you to produce, you know, um, emails of these people within your agency for these dates and times, and give this to us by the end of the week. And that can be a subpoena where no one really has to step forward, or come and bring it to them. They can actually reply through email, or maybe through some sort of file transfer protocol site, or like a FT. They're normally called like FTP sites, where you're able to download these these files after they're created, they're processed and created. Allows DA's office or whoever the authority is that's issuing the subpoena, allow them to download this information. Any questions on that? Okay. So along with these subpoenas and search warrants, uh, it's very easy for law enforcement to obtain information about all of us, right? About all of us in regards to our social media, um, so social media sites, for example, right? Like, so we have, Instagram or Facebook, maybe our cell phones, right? We have Verizon or AT&T, really makes no difference. Even our LinkedIn accounts, right? Or maybe other emails, right? If you guys have Hotmail, or use any of the other Outlook, type of emails. Well, every company has what they call supplementals for law enforcement. Basically, they're guides for law enforcement. That says, look, if you guys are gonna subpoena any information or use a search warrant to obtain any information on any of our customers, these are the rules you have to follow, right? So that's what these supplements for law enforcement are. They used to be only available to law enforcement back in the day. Again, after 9/11, a lot of things happened, right? And including opening the doors of making it known to everyone, not just law enforcement, of what can be obtained, and the process of how this works. All this used to be very cryptic. Used to have to know, who to contact, and before this, and then, after a while, they just a lot of it got foiled, right? Like Freedom of Information Act, where they have to like, a lot of people from the press, for example, they foil these requests and say, look, I need to see, what guides you have available for law enforcement. And what they've done is they've made it available to the public. And so now we see it outright, easily available. You can easily search for like literally supplements for law enforcement and find them. And now I just showed you, I have links here, and I'll show you what these links look like so you can see what I'm talking about. Some may be so detailed that they tell you exactly what the retention period is, how long they'll have this for or that for, in regards to chats, conversations, when you logged in, when you logged out, um, your email information, stuff that you sent, what you looked at, what you clicked. It can be very detailed or it can be very general. And what these sites do is they tell you, but law enforcement, so that way right? As a customer, wouldn't it be nice to know, well, what exactly does or what exactly can law enforcement get if they use a subpoena or they use a search warrant, and what's the difference, right? Why use a subpoena versus a search warrant, right? So, and that's the whole point of all this. In that, as an example, if all let's say I was law enforcement and all I wanted to know was who owned a specific account. And when I say who, I want to know like name, address, maybe credit card information, how they paid, how long they've had that account for, whatever. Then all I would need is like a subpoena, and that's more like registry information. Like how did you register the account? Like what name did you use? Who else uses those accounts? You know, um, that subpoena type of information. Now with a search warrant, I want content. Or search warrant, I get that information plus the content of the emails, the content of the text messages. So there's a difference of, well, how many, text messages did this person, send and receive versus what were in those text messages, right? What were the content in those text messages, right? Or the content in the emails. That's when I would need a search warrant, right? So search warrant deals with content, whereas the subpoena is more superficial, right? It's more like I need the registrar type of information. But keep in mind that the definition of subpoena, I can also ask for very specific information, right? So if I wanted, very specific information from a given, entity, whether that entity was law enforcement or private or whatever, I could request it through a subpoena. But a search warrant is more enforceable. You know, with a subpoena, if you don't comply to subpoena, there are penalties. There might be fines, monetary fines, maybe even jail time and stuff like that. But in terms of, which one packs, the greatest punch, it would be a search warrant. But when it comes to accessing, let's say, these social networking sites or your emails or whatever, the difference between subpoena and search warrant is basically content. If you need the content or if you want the content, you have to do a search warrant, which is harder to get, harder to obtain. So remember I was telling you how with a subpoena, there are agencies that have subpoena powers, right? And it's based on jurisdiction. Whereas with a search warrant, it's a lot more involved, right? You have to have probable cause, and you have to have a judge sign the subpoena to say, look, we believe, this website, was used, or email, was used, as part of a, huge crime spree, and this is why, this is why we think we'll find something, then you just signs off on it. Then you contact the service provider, and then the service provider will provide you, right, as a law enforcement officer, with whatever you've requested. Any questions on that?
Do they inform the person the person that they're after or the information that they're after, like the entity?
Yeah, so uh, in some instances, that is a possibility, but it doesn't always have to be the case. Like they'll tell you, like they'll tell you, meaning like in these law enforcement guides, they'll say whether or not they're obligated to let the person know, and normally they don't, but it's dependent on jurisdiction. In some, I've seen wording where they say, look, if any law enforcement requests are made, that they will let the person know eventually. Like they may not let them know right then and there, right? Because keep in mind that some of these are basically like for emergency purposes. They call it like exigent, circumstances where forget about everything, stop what you're doing. We need this information right now because it's literally like, a matter of, life or death. But to answer your question, yes, they do notify the person eventually, but they don't necessarily have to notify them immediately.
Thank you.
You got it. So let me just show you some of this so that you can see the Instagram one. I already clicked on it on here, so just you can see for Instagram and Facebook are the same owner, right? So they'll tell you, this is what how you go about requesting information, user information, what their data retention and availability is. Of course, they're not very specific here, right? They say we retain different types of information for different time periods. And given the volume that they're dealing with, they may not always have the information. So that's why, when it comes to these types of investigations, law enforcement tends to have to act fast, right? You can't sit around or whatever. Something's been sitting on someone's desk for months. You can forget about a lot of this data. Now I'm talking about if it's just almost like social networking page. I mean, people keep stuff there for years, right? That's not a big deal. But if we're talking, let's say a text message, for like on your cell phone, like the fact that we're sending text messages, back and forth or whatever, these text messages, think of all the like, tens of millions or hundreds of millions text messages on a daily basis. Think how much storage, companies would have to have in order to retain this for months or even for a year. That's not realistic. So what companies do, when I'm saying these service providers like AT&T, Verizon and all these other service providers that have cell phones and plans, they normally keep their retention for text messages, for example, anywhere between like 3 to 5 days or something like that. Once you're past that 5 day mark, you can forget about retrieving those text messages, not from the phone company themselves, not from the service provider. Now, there's a possibility, like if you had access to the phone itself, that I may have sent a text message and I didn't delete anything, right? And I know some of you never delete your text messages, right? Whereas others always delete your text messages, right? So you'll find that both ways, right? So let's say, for example, I'm law enforcement and I have reason to believe that a drug dealer's phone number whose phone I'm in possession of. I just don't have the code at the moment. I need to know what text messages he sent. Well, I'm sending Verizon a search warrant to say, look, I need to look at these text messages that were sent by this number, within these dates or these dates and times. I need to look at the all the records you guys have. And so what they would do, they would turn around and, let's say, have it available within an hour, within a couple of hours or whatever. Turnaround time is dependent on how extreme, the circumstances are, right? And then I can look at the text messages. But of course, what if I asked the subject to say, look, let me look at your phone, and they gave me consent, right, to look at the phone. Maybe they punch in the code, or maybe they use their fingerprint. So that's the other thing too, right? With nowadays with the phones, right? The fact that we have, the Touch ID. There was even precedence to say that consent is no longer required on your phone if what law enforcement typically does is they take your thumbprint anyway, right? And the fact that they're using your hand to do the thumbprint, that's enough just to put your thumbprint over the Touch ID and to give access to the phone. That no longer consent is required. Again, that might be various cases, and certain maybe in criminal cases or whatever. But I have heard that that's the case now. That I don't know if it was up for the debate or it was just something that was a thing. So what people did or would do, how like if you turn off your phone and turn it back on again, you have to punch in the code before the Touch ID is active. So that people were doing that, smart enough to know, what, I don't want to, I want to, any issues, they would turn off their device or whatever, knowing that, they would have to be asked what their code is, and the biggest, I say best kept secret is how do you get into someone's phone, that you want to have access to, is you just ask them what the code is. That's enough for the person to open up, and maybe unlock the phone for law enforcement. And most of the time they'll comply just by asking. And for those that don't, that's when they'll try to break in or use, these mobile forensic tools, to gain access to the, to the phone, that way, and then look at the text messages. And keep in mind that that's one way, right? What if on the other end you have, let's say the murdered victim, for example, who's dead, so you can't get, the person's code, and maybe the thumbprint you couldn't use the touch ID either because the phone was off. So either you take an extraction of the phone, right? You take a physical extraction of the phone, or at least a file system level extraction where you try to get, be able to, still obtain the text messages or whatever, and let's say you do gain access to the phone, and let's say that person, in this case the murdered victim, didn't delete the text. Well, you'll be able to see the text on that end, right? So there are various ways that law enforcement can use, right? They can use the service provider to assist. They can use the subject, or they can use the victim, right? Depending on if if they got basically three chances to be able to call up the text that's involved in that. Any questions?
Can you put the link in the chat so we can look at, because it's strong, the screen can't really see.
Yeah. No, it's small on there. Let me throw it in the chat for you guys.
In regards to the phones, I remember like a few years ago, Apple advertised something that they have some
Yeah,
kind of security with the phone. Would those forensic tools work on only certain devices like Apple or Samsung?
the forensic tools, yes. Yeah. So forensic tools do have. Yeah, you guys can see it better now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, forensic tools do have are specific to the operating system. So if you have a Windows box or a Mac OS X or whatever, depending on the type of system you have, like if you're using an Android phone, most forensic tools are made for a Windows systems. But if you have a Mac, they do have Mac tools. So it's probably better to use a Mac to deal with, let's say Apple products, right? Whether it's an iPad or an iPhone. But that's not to say that you couldn't use a Windows tool to do the phone extraction. Or they have tools that are dedicated, to have their own, basically a closed operating system. Maybe like a small scaled version of Windows, or small scaled version of Linux, to be able to do the extraction just for the purposes of doing mobile extractions.
The case I was thinking about, I can't remember who exactly it was, but it was a case that they wanted to get into the person's iPhone, and Apple wouldn't give them the permission or whatever. So that's what I was asking about that.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I forget. They were claiming it was like some terrorists, some terrorists, so they needed access to the phone, and Apple refused, because by Apple giving up that information, that would mean not even the information, giving up the ability to be able to access that would mean that they would have to push out a patch, that would actually degrade the security on their operating system, and to do that, they would have to do that for everyone.
Oh yeah.
And so that's why they refused it.
Professor, isn't that the one that had to do with the shooting? I think in San Francisco.
Yeah,
Yeah, the one.
that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, the one where the FBI, they went and they got some other person to basically like get through the back door of the iPhone and find the guy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what they did was they hired a company. I think it was Celebrite, actually. It was Celebrite. They one of the more popular mobile extraction units, and software. They hired that company. I think they actually spent $1 million or whatever, to be able to to hack it.
Yeah, and then Apple sued the FBI because they didn't want to tell them who basically got into the phone, right?
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. They got into it, but the whole point is that the way they got into it, they didn't use any of Apple's features or whatever, right? Because I mean, we can jailbreak Apple phones, right? And jailbreaking is nothing more than just you're bypassing the security on the phone, right? So let's say if I wanted to, install an application on an iPhone that wasn't part of the App Store, right? The App Store is what limits you to what you can install on an iPhone. And if I didn't want to use that, then I'll jailbreak the phone, meaning I'm compromising the security of that iPhone. Now I can install anything I want on there, but in doing that, I now open myself up to a lot more like malware, stuff that, there's a lot of stuff out there that are just waiting for phones to be jailbroken to get into your, your cell phone to hack out, to extract all the information. And when you extract stuff from phones, is normally referred, not only phones, only just computers in general, is known as exfiltration, right? But now they're exfiltrating as much data as possible from your phone. So think of, I know we discussed this in the discussion boards anyway, all the stuff that we have on our cell phones, right? That like our entire livelihood is our phone. So what if someone had access to everything on your phone, right? It'll be a lot easier to do some sort of, extortion or ransom or something like that, right? A lot easier to get money out of you if I have everything about you, or even just to do, stealing your identity.
So this Celebrite company, everything that they did to hack into the phone, that was all legit, and they were able to use, like, of course they had to let the judge and the lawyers know, like, we hired this company to hack the phone, and they rocked with that. I don't remember finishing whatever happened with that situation.
Yeah. So when it comes to like what was done independently, this wasn't like, it wasn't done with, obviously none of this is done with Apple's permission and stuff, right? So and Apple's permission isn't needed. Like once they have possession of the phone, they can do whatever they want with it, and because it was done, on the guise of, law enforcement, there are protections in place, to do that. Even as a consumer, I can do whatever I want with my cell phone. If I jailbroke it, it's not illegal. It's not illegal to jailbreak it. I would just void a lot of the terms and conditions. I can't, I won't be able to get like updates or patches or stuff like that. Like that's where it'll pose problems. Or if something happened to my device and I went to the Apple store to get it fixed, they're like, look, we can't do anything for you. This is jailbroken. So that's where, that's where, the consumer, would be at a disadvantage.
I have a quick question about using the fingerprints for the Touch ID. How is that not illegal?
How
Like,
is
wouldn't
it?
that? Yeah, how is it not? Like, wouldn't that be an invasion of privacy if they chose not to, and you don't have a warrant for it? If they chose not to give you the passcode.
So if they don't give you, let's say they don't give you the passcode, so the argument is that because they already take your fingerprint, that technically they already have the fingerprint. And so by using the Touch ID, it's not even consent. It's more like, they can just like physically force your finger onto the onto the Touch ID.
Yeah.
I know,
it just seems very like not legal,
Yeah, no, I hear you. Like I said, like I haven't followed it enough, to say that this is exactly what happens. But I know that was one of the arguments that was posed, and some of the states were doing that. They were like, look, if we're already taking fingerprints, then we don't have to ask for your consent, right? We don't ask your consent to do the fingerprint. Well, we're not asking your consent to, gaining access to your phone. So again, it might work only in certain circumstances, but I have heard this being done. Whether or not, all the states are doing it or whatever, that I'm not sure. But again, it's, it's food for thought, right? It's things to, to think about.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. All right. So I just want to stay a few more minutes on this. And
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, sorry, Professor. So I don't know if I heard wrong or not. You said that jailbreaking a phone is not illegal, you said?
Correct. Right. You don't go to jail, for jailbreaking, right? Jailbreaking a phone, all you're doing is you're disabling the security that's within the operating system.
Oh, okay. And
Yeah.
about the it's not literal tools that law enforcement uses. It's like codes, and they have like their own software to be able to get into people's phones, right?
Yeah, it's software.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, so it's not, I mean, it can also be opening up the phone and getting the data directly from the chips, that's on the phone. That's also that's a combination of software and hardware.
Okay, 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 okay.
Yeah, but for
Got
the
it.
most part, yeah, we're only doing that. Like, law enforcement will only do that. Is actually called chip extraction. That's the name of it. When they're actually taking the phone apart and taking the chips that store all the data that's on your phone,
Mm.
and then extracting the chips, and then going through a chip reader and extracting the data from there. That's another way to do it.
Right, of course. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Now you got it. So this is an example of Verizon Verizon's mobile service and their retention periods. So here you can see where they say, okay, the call detail records and the cell sites, they have up to 1 year, right? So let's say, if I had the call detail records, I know who you called, who meaning the numbers, right? The cell numbers you called, and the cell sites, the locations of where you made those calls, or at the very least, which cell tower you connected to when you made that phone call, right? So that information is kept up to 1 year, and one rolling year meaning, after the year, it just rolls over. So same log, you have 1 year up until the current date, essentially. That's essentially, what that means. Same with the text message detail. Who you text, meaning the phone number you text. So it might have maybe like your phone number you text, the date, the time, and how many characters was the text message. Like that's what's considered text message detail. Another way to say that would be metadata. You have the metadata of the text. Then there's text message content, right? What you actually wrote. That's what's kept anywhere from 3 to 5 days. So this is what I was talking about, where if it was like a murder investigation or something like that, and you needed to know exactly what was text, and you had the phone number, you was possession of the phone, you just didn't have access to the phone, it might have been destroyed or whatever. You need to contact the service provider immediately and see, well, which number texts this person, or which person, what the phone number called or whatever. If you want to see content, then you have to do a search warrant, and use looking, you have to do this within that 5-day period. And then IP information, and destination information. So IP information meaning, if I use my phone, I can be connected to a cell tower and get my internet that way through my cell tower. That's one way of doing it. Or I can be using on my phone and getting my internet through my Wi-Fi, or maybe a Wi-Fi in someone else's home, or maybe in a Starbucks or in a McDonald's or whatever, right? So IP information is important because IP, remember we talk about IP addresses, right? Everything that connects, any device that connects to the internet has to have an IP address. And if you have an IP address, it's a unique IP address. And if it's unique, that means it can be traced back, right? So the possibility lies that, I can probably put the phone at a specific location just by IP address alone. That can be enough. So now I use the IP address in conjunction with the core detail records, with the cell sites. I can put, the cell tower, right? All the cell towers are very, all around us. So within a mile radius or something like that, somewhere within this vicinity. But then I have the IP information, which says, what, that IP address is issued at the hair cuttery, salon, down the block or whatever. So that's where they were getting their, that's where they were located, or that's where they were before all this happened. So that's why IP information is important. And then of course, copies of the bills, right? When was it paid, and stuff like that, and the history. How long has the person had this phone, and that helps too, right? That makes a big difference. If I just bought the phone yesterday, it might be like a burner phone, right? I might just just purposes of using it and then discarding it. But if I've kept this phone for a lot of years, chances are I got a lot of good data on there, right? I have a literal treasure trove of data that that I can use against that person.